So hello everybody, welcome to the IEP Live Learn Lunch. Today is our 50th Live Learn Lunch. I can't believe it's half century we've reached it. So thank you all for your support over the past weeks and months. Today's session is going to be a fantastic one. For those of you who join regularly, you'll know I've been talking about this for a few weeks. So we've got Dawn, who has joined us from Autism Plus, and she's going to be taking us through the session today. So rather than waffling on, as I do sometimes when I'm excited at the start of these sessions, I'm going to say welcome to Dawn. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to hand over to Dawn. But before I do, just the last second thing before I do, this session is going to be interactive. Dawn really does want to hear your questions and thoughts. So please do use the chat facility throughout the session. Pop any thoughts, any questions, any insights that you'd like to share in that chat, and me and Dawn will make sure that we pick that up throughout the session. So Dawn, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. I never get such a nice introduction, so thank you, Helen. It's normally me introducing myself, so it's nice to have somebody else introduce it. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Is that yeah? Just shout me.
Yes, yeah, we can see it.
Fabulous. So I suppose, Helen, I'm going to hide while I'm talking so you don't see me switching screens, but I am still here, but I am going to stop my video just while I'm talking through the slides. So thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's lovely to see such a wide range of people. Some providers we already work with, that we work with other providers in the room, and then others are new, so it's great to meet you all. It's fabulous to have you all in the room. The session today is going to look at things to consider when supporting neurodiverse job seekers, and we're going to look at reasonable adjustments and how to adapt recruitment processes to get the best out of neurodiverse applicants. So this is for you guys as employers, but also as support advisors. So what can we ask companies, what can we ask employers to do for our applicants? Common workplace barriers, so some of the things that we come across really regularly, and how to support neurodiverse employees within the workplace. And then at the end, we're just going to talk about what support is available from ourselves at Autism Plus. So we're going to kick off with a bit of a poll. As Helen said, I like things to be interactive. So I want you to think about what percentage of individuals in the UK do you think are neurodiverse? And we have got a poll for that. So the options are 5%, 35%, 15%, or 50%. So people are already answering, fab. So we've got a lot of people going for the 35%.
We have those middle two, 35 and 15 are the most popular at the moment, Dawn.
It's like watching a race, isn't it?
It is. I always find this so exciting. I often forget I'm running the poll and forget to do the processing. I'm so intrigued by the answers. So we've still got votes coming through. 35% is still the highest by quite some margin at the moment. We've got about 87% of people have voted now, so we'll give you another few seconds.
It's nice when all the answers get good. We've got a nice range of answers, so that's good.
Excellent. So we'll give you another couple of seconds, and then I think we'll end that poll. I think we've probably got everyone's.
So the winner for that one is 35%. We've got a few people saying 15%, and then we've got a couple of answers in the 5% and 50%. So the figure is,
there you go.
We've got it there, perfect. So we've got the results showing. So the actual figure is that it's estimated that around 1 in 7 people, so more than 15% of people in the UK are neurodivergent. And when you think about autism, it's predicted at 1.1%. Not sure how accurate that is. I think it's a little bit higher, but that just shows the range of neurodiversity and other kind of things that link into that. So thinking about the word neurodiversity, it's a fairly new word, and I think terminology kind of comes out all the time, but neurodiversity has got a little bit of conversation around the word. So some people really like this new word neurodiversity, and others have got kind of their own opinions on it. For the point of this webinar, we quite like the word neurodiversity. We feel it really represents a lot of the customers that we support. And the reason this word, like neurodiversity as a word, neuro links to the brain, so things that are linked to the brain, and then diversity is around the fact that very different people or things exist within a group or place. So it's that diverse. So the definitions when we're talking about neurodiversity, generally neurodiverse means that the brain functions and learns and processes information differently. And when we say differently, it's different from the norm. And that's where neurotypical comes into play. So neurotypical means that the brain functions and processes information in the way that society expects. Now this, I can see that as time goes on, these will change. So the definitions will change, because neurodiversity, as you've seen in that poll, is on the rise. 15% of people that are neurodiverse. So as more people are neurodiverse, society will change. So neurotypical, the definition will change itself. So but for the purpose of this, we're looking at neurodiversity as people that function in a slightly different way, that they process information in a slightly different way. So a common thing with neurodiversity is a lot of the time it's used for just autism. So a lot of people will say, oh, neurodiverse people, and the assumption will be autism. In actual fact, it's a lot bigger than that. It isn't just autism. It's, as we said, things to do with the brain. So it can link to dyspraxia, it can link to dyscalculia, it can link to dyslexia, ADHD, anxiety and depression, OCD, and other conditions as well. And yes, Tom, so neurodiversity, the term has been around a long time, but I believe recently it's been used far more. So I think it's become a bit of a fashionable term. These terms tend to come in and out as time goes on. And I know there's been some recent discussions around the use of that word, and the whether it's acceptable term, whether it's not an acceptable term. And I think we find that this terminology does change over time. So looking at some of the main ones, is we're going to go through some of the main neurodiverse conditions. So dyslexia, for example, is a learning difference that impacts on reading and writing skills. But it's far bigger than that. It's not just reading and writing. It can also impact around memory. It might impact somebody's organizational skills or information processing. It might impact on focus, or they might become easily distracted, or somebody might become overwhelmed by a lot of instructions. What's important to note is you'll notice that throughout these conditions, there is a lot of overlap. There are lots of traits that would link to autism, but might also link to dyslexia. It's very, very difficult to kind of see them very separately. So a lot of our customers might have been diagnosed with dyslexia at school, because people at school generally, to have an autism diagnosis, they have to go to specialists, whereas dyslexia can be diagnosed or looked at school. And then when they've got to adulthood, they might also have an autism diagnosis as well. So that it can cross over, and you can see some of the traits that cross over. For example, the organizational skills might also link to ADHD as well. So ADHD and ADD, somebody might have traits of inattentiveness or impulsivity or hyperactivity. So again, challenges there might be around concentration, or focusing on a topic, or time management, or somebody might be quite fidgety or unable to sit still. There might be communication barriers or impulsive behaviour. So you can see already the similarities between ADHD and dyslexia. Dyspraxia is another learning difference, and that impacts around coordination and movement, but as well as hand-eye coordination, there are also kind of barriers around organisational skills, potentially, might be memory issues and communication barriers again. And then autism, I've gone into a little bit more about autism, as that's our specialist area. We do cover all areas of neurodiversity, but autism is our specialism. So somebody with autism might have communication and social interaction difficulties and repetitive behaviours, and difficulties with flexibility of thought. And these are some of the areas that people might struggle with. So it might be that they find it hard to communicate and interact with other people. We've got a lot of customers that are really great at communicating in some circumstances, but then might struggle in other situations. Some people with autism might take things literally and might struggle with ambiguity. They might get anxious or upset about unfamiliar situations and social events. They might struggle in conversations, or they might struggle with unwritten social rules. There might be difficulties coping with change and a need to have consistency in routines. They might struggle to deal with new and unfamiliar situations, or have a preoccupation with a narrow topic of interest, or there might be a preference for clear rules and regulations. Now, the reason I'm telling you all about this is not because I want you to become experts at neurodiversity. It's for two reasons. Firstly, to show you the crossover, as I've said, that some of the barriers are the same. But secondly, to say to you that as professionals or employers, it's really good to worry about barriers rather than conditions. So rather than going, oh, this person has ADHD, I know exactly how to deal with that because I've got a son with ADHD. Instead, you look at the specific barriers and say, okay, they've got communication difficulties. This is how we might solve that kind of barrier. So looking more at the traits rather than the condition. Because just because somebody's got autism doesn't mean they will have all of the same difficulties. Everybody is different and everybody's disability is different. So just make sure that you're looking at the barriers and the traits rather than the actual condition itself. I train autism 3 or 4 times a week, and I still wouldn't class myself as an expert. Every time I meet somebody new, they have different traits and they have different barriers. So it's about treating that person as an individual. In addition to this, people might have sensory processing difficulties. And that can be things such as finding things like bright lights and loud noises overwhelming, stressful or uncomfortable. Or it might be fans in the office that cause a problem. It can be certain unexpected background noises. People might be sensitive to temperature or environment changes. So if you've got a really hot office or you've got a really cold office, people might be quite sensitive to that. They might have a strong sense of smell or sound sensitivity, or maybe don't like crowded places or narrow spaces, or they might be hypersensitive or hyposensitive to sensory stimulus. So they might be very, very sensitive to smells, for example, depending on the individual. Aside from all the barriers, here are some of the amazing qualities that neurodiverse candidates can offer to employers. And that is things like being hyper-focused on things, being enthusiastic. If somebody's special interest is the job that they're in. So for example, I absolutely love talking about autism. That makes my job brilliant because it's something that I'm really, really interested in. Individuals who are neurodiverse can be really strategic thinkers. They're out-the-box thinkers. They might be innovative. They might make good designers. They might be really good at problem solving. So these are some of the benefits. And this is what I would be saying to employers. If I was an advisor, I'd be saying to employers that are considering employing somebody who's neurodiverse, all of these amazing positive things that that person can bring to the organization. So thinking about recruitment, we're going to go through the journey. So we're going to go through recruitment and then we're going to talk about in-work support. So looking at recruitment, some of the key words that I like to see is when a recruitment process is adaptable, it's fair, it's relaxed, flexible, supportive, accessible, linked to the job role. Some of the things that I don't like to see, that we don't like to see as advisors, is recruitment processes that are rushed, that are rigid, things that involve purely situational judgment tests, things that are outdated, maybe score-based interviews, maybe even irrelevant interviews or automated processes. So looking at irrelevant, for example, I have seen many a time interview processes that involve answering questions when the job role is purely practical. So for somebody with autism, that's very, very difficult to talk about how they would do something in theory, and it would be far more suitable to show somebody how to do what they're able to do. And that scales up to even higher level jobs. So I've got a guy I'm supporting at the moment in cybersecurity who is brilliant. He's got a master's that he did himself. And he's struggling with interview processes because there's a lot of questions involved. There's a lot of how would you do this? Whereas if you just gave him a computer, he could probably hack into Barclays Bank quite easily, but nobody will give him a computer to do it. We're too busy talking about it. So I want you to think about your own recruitment processes, because it's important to model good practice. So think about your own organisations, but think about any processes that you've seen recently. And again, we've just got another poll. I want you to let me know, are they mostly rigid and outdated? Are companies starting to make changes? Are we starting to get better at this? Or are they extremely flexible, adaptable and accessible? Brilliant. So we've got quite a good flexible, adaptable and accessible. It's good to see. Got a bit of a fight with B and C that going on at the moment.
Yeah, I can see that. I wonder, Dawn, while we're seeing those answers come in, I wonder if some of that starting to make changes has been kick-started by COVID as well, because it's changed everyone's recruitment processes, hasn't it? Over the
absolutely. And I think that obviously with COVID, and I've got this written down, is that historically people have said, oh, we've never done it like this before. We've never done online interviews. Why would we do that now? Whereas with COVID, people have had to do that, and they're starting to see the benefit of technology. And I imagine moving in forward, a lot of companies will keep that online interview process because it's quite an efficient process in comparison to face-to-face. So James had just said in the chat that they've used the disability confidence scheme to make the process better and more open, and that's fabulous. I mean, that's really, really good. I've intentionally not mentioned disability confident in this presentation just because of time limitations, but disability confident it's brilliant for our customers who are looking for jobs when we find a disability confident employer, because we know that they're already having conversations about the process. So we've got a lot that are starting to make changes. So we had 67% that are starting to make changes. We've got flexible and adaptable, but we still have got some processes that are rigid and outdated. And that's the thing, one of the issues as advisors specifically that we're going to find is that how do we talk to employers and how do we have those conversations? So I'm just going to change the slide. So some of the common barriers that our neurodiverse applicants face during recruitment are things like job advert wording. So some job adverts sound absolutely fancy, they sound amazing, but they don't actually link to a real job. They're maybe an overview of what somebody might do, and it's making sure that the advert itself is linked to the job. So I see on a lot of applications excellent written and verbal communication for jobs that will not have any verbal or any written communication at all. But it seems to be something that employers just kind of like to put on there. But that actually excludes a lot of our customers because they have communication barriers. So I've had a lot of customers that have just said, well, I can't apply for that because I'm not very good at communication. I've got autism. And in actual fact, that shouldn't exclude anybody from a job because, as I'm sure a lot of you know, there are support that we can put in place for communication. We can, for somebody who's dyslexic, we can get readers, we can get automated devices for computers. We can get spell check and grammar check. There's lots of things that we can do to support somebody around written and verbal communication. So it's about making sure that the job adverts are accurate. And things like telephone interviews, that can be a barrier for some of our customers because they can't see people's faces. Recently, one of my customers did an interview on Teams and the entire interview panel had their cameras off. And that's really difficult because you're talking to a black screen. You don't know who you're talking to, you don't know if they're smiling, and that's quite a tricky situation. So being mindful of that. Sometimes application forms can be a barrier. So if somebody's got dyslexia, for example, and really struggles, application forms can be quite complicated and convoluted, and somebody might need support with that. Interview processes. So some interview processes are brilliant. You'll get lots of information up front about the expectations. I've had really good ones in the past where they've told me that I'm going to have a 30-minute interview followed by a test, followed by maybe a conversation. But some interview processes just give you a date and a time and tell you when to log on. And so it's thinking about what information people give about interview processes. Eye contact, a really big one because it's not as important on a video call. It's not as easy to spot on a video call. But there's been a lot of people that go to interviews who struggle with eye contact because of their disability and have not got the job because they've seemed unconfident. Now, eye contact is very, very good for communication, and we try and support our job seekers to make eye contact. But again, a lot of the jobs that people are going for are not going to involve that kind of communication. So why is somebody scored on eye contact? And that can be a real barrier. Somebody might be put on the spot, so not have any thinking time. That can have a barrier because not having that extra processing time, specifically for somebody with autism, can put somebody at a disadvantage. There might be misunderstanding of questions and expectations. So another guy that I supported had ADHD, and the feedback that he got was that his interview was very strong, but he talked a lot. He gave too much information. Now, if somebody had said to him, I want one example, then that might have stopped that from becoming a bit of a longer interview. I mean, for me as an interviewer, I'd love to get lots of information because that helps me to make a decision. So it's about making sure that the expectations are set out very clearly if you're doing interviews. My absolute worst situation is when an employer asks, if you were a biscuit, what biscuit would you be? Or if you were a superhero, what superpower would you have? And for a lot of our customers, one, what is the relevance of what biscuit I would be? And two, how do you even answer that question? A lot of our customers would go, well, I told them I was an Oreo, but it didn't make a lot of sense. So it's thinking about your interview processes that might seem really fun and really innovative and modern, but actually for our customers, that might be excluding them from the job because that might be the point where somebody goes, I can't answer that question. So it's thinking about those questions.
I think that's
Interviews
sorry, Don. Just I'm just looking at the chat here, and it's really interesting. It ties in. We've had some really interesting comments that I'll come back to in a bit. But Debs was just saying about how many of the government roles, etc., at the moment are asking for the submission that you film your interview answers and submit them, which can be an issue for all people, but for particularly those with barriers. And that really ties in with what you were saying. So I thought it was an interesting point.
No, absolutely. And it's thinking about, and we talk about this in the actual in-work support, but a lot of neurodiverse individuals are massive perfectionists. So whereas one applicant might have spent 20 minutes doing a video and he's quite happy with it, it's who I am, I think it's totally represented who I am, whereas somebody else might have spent 5 days trying to get the perfect video and still might not feel like that's the perfect video. And that might stop somebody from applying, you know, to the job in itself. And Thomas, like you've just said, they don't give you the option to re-record your submission. More recently, there have been like timed things. I know for the police, for example, you kind of have to log in between 2 dates and get it all done within that time, but you don't really know what you're logging into, so it's difficult to prepare for it. And it doesn't, obviously, because you can't come in and out of it, if something happens during the interview, what do you do then? And it's a very, very difficult process. Obviously, meeting new people in interviews, that's just generally anxiety building. And it's how we manage that in a video situation, because it can be quite intimidating. I know from webinars, seeing people's faces and knowing how many people are in the room, that makes me anxious. So it's how people feel meeting new people for the first time. Luckily, I've met Helen before, so that's kind of helped with some of my anxiety of today. And then interview etiquette. Interview etiquette is very different online to what it is face to face. You know, you can't shake hands with somebody online. I'm sure you've all read a lot of things around the Zoom wave. You know, do we wave at the end of a Zoom call or not? I will always wave. It's just part of who I am. I can't say bye without doing it. And I think it's lovely to have a little bit of a wave at the end. But is that suitable in an interview? You know, how do people do that in the body language during an interview? So these are just a portion of the barriers that somebody might have with recruitment. And then I've just come up with a few solutions. So things like adaptable recruitment processes. So show me rather than tell me. You know, you can set things, especially with things like cybersecurity, for example, you could do a show me task. Or if you want a written report, you could get them to prepare something for the session and then talk about it in the session. I would much rather employ somebody that could show me they could write a report than somebody that says, oh, in my last job, I wrote hundreds of reports. They were brilliant. So think about what people can show in an interview. The question that a lot of organizations ask, and I think a lot of advisors ask as well, is what adjustments do you need? Now that question is massive. That's a really big question. And a lot of the people that I support will go, I don't know what I need. I don't even know what the interview is. So we tend to advise employers to say, what barriers have you got, rather than what adjustments do you need? So if you say to somebody, you know, what barriers do you have? It's going to be a video interview. Somebody might say, oh, I'm really going to struggle with Teams if I can't see somebody's face. That's a far more open and transparent conversation than what adjustments do you need? And recently, one of my customers had a situation where it was a police interview again, and they asked what adjustments he needed. Or they asked him, sorry, if he needed adjustments. And he said yes. And they rang him and said, oh, what adjustments do you need? And his response was, I don't know what the interview process is, so I can't possibly give you that answer. And so that then caused a massive kind of conversation starter around, you know, if it was a test, I probably wouldn't need any adjustments. Whereas if it's a face-to-face interview, I might need to know what the questions are beforehand, so I've got time to prepare. So it is about those open conversations. And as advisors, if there are, I know there's quite a few advisors in the room, it's our job to kind of have those conversations beforehand so we can start the conversation with the employer. Make sure that they're offering person-centered, reasonable adjustments from the beginning. So we come across a lot of disability confident employers that say, oh, well, we offer extra time, but that might not be suitable for everybody's disability. So it's about making sure that they are person-centered and that you know about the applicant or you know about the person that you're supporting. And remember that small changes can have the biggest impact. So just changing the colour of somebody's screen can enable them to be able to perform better than if they're looking at a bright white screen with dark writing on it. Try and involve HR. So as advisors, you can involve HR. I very regularly talk to HR about processes. rather than ringing the hiring managers, because HR are sometimes the people that have those conversations with the managers. So remember that HR exists, and sometimes they have their own disability networks that you can speak to as well. Make sure if you're an employer that the questions are relevant to the role. So please don't ask them what biscuit they want to be unless that's part of the role. Or if you are going to ask that question, maybe don't pin the whole interview on the answer of that question. It's really helpful to have the questions before the interview, and there's been some kind of conflict about this, about fairness. And I had a lot of conversations with different employers, and some employers are really happy to give the questions before. Others say absolutely not. That, you know, for me, if they could have the questions 10 minutes before in a written format, that's really good for a lot of our customers, because it just gives that little bit of thinking time. And you can do that for all applicants. It doesn't have to just be disabled applicants. That possibly would get better out of all of the applicants. And 10 minutes doesn't really give somebody time to Google the answers. So I think maybe 10 minutes before giving somebody the questions would really help.
And I think, sorry, Dawn, and this really ties in again to something we've been chatting about with Debs in the chat, is around actually interviewing is a skill set in itself, which I think employers miss, don't they? They don't realise that recruitment interview, and actually it should be about an opportunity to give someone their opportunity to demonstrate their capability and competence. And it's not about just putting people on the spot. So like you say, they'd probably get better interviews if they gave everyone a chance to see the questions in advance. And as long as everyone has them, it's still an even playing field, isn't it?
Absolutely. And being more inclusive helps everybody. Exactly. Doesn't just help disabled applicants. Being more inclusive helps everybody. And I think that's the thing to remember, is sometimes with interviews, if we ask on the spot questions, we're not judging somebody's ability in a role, we're judging their recall. We're judging them based on whether they've done lots of interviews before, whether they're able to interview well, whether they're really good at winging it. Like, I know in interviews, I'm very good at winging it. So hopefully none of you will ever interview me, because I've just given away my trade secret.
Me too, Dawn, me too. But it doesn't test what it needs to, does it? Exactly.
No, it doesn't. And I could probably wing it, but then be really, really useless. And an example of this is probably a waitress. I could answer every question about being a waitress. I did it when I was 16. But I am so clumsy that I would be the worst waitress you've ever employed. So it's remembering that when you're going in to do interviews, or when you're supporting individuals. And then just give clearer guidance about what to expect. So if you're expecting somebody to give one example or two examples, put that in the information beforehand. If you're going to ask them to do 10 star jumps to evidence their physical ability, tell them beforehand so they know what to expect. You know, if you absolutely don't want a Zoom wave at the end, give somebody a chance and tell them that you don't want a Zoom wave. You know, I think it's about giving that guidance. You're not giving somebody the answers, you're giving somebody the tools to perform the best that they can possibly perform.
And actually, and that's spot on, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, having the questions in advance, even if you did sort of make up your answers, a good interviewer will be able to probe and will know anyway, won't they? A skilled interviewer will be able to ask questions and develop it. So, you know, it's
absolutely. And the skilled interviewer will be able to probe. But imagine somebody who's prepared for an interview. Imagine how much better they're going to perform if they've got that preparation. And I think that does even out the playing field with regards to recruitment. And what I will say to everybody is there's no harm in being cheeky. I ring hiring managers up all the time, and I'm just a little bit cheeky. But I think most importantly is honesty. And this is what I teach my customers, is that if the company that we're applying for can't give you reasonable adjustments, what is it going to be like to work for them as an employee? So it's better to be honest at the beginning about your limitations and about the support that you need, and potentially not get the job, than to lie about it and end up in the job and then panic because you can't do the things that it says on the tin. So I very much advocate for a little bit of honesty. So tell the employer, these are my barriers, but you know what? I'm fabulous at this. I'm hardworking. I'm committed. You know, I will never leave if you support me. Have those honest conversations. Because otherwise what you're going to have is an individual that maybe gets a job, that's brilliant, but then ends up in a really awful situation where they're not supported and will then be unemployed for 3 years because of that negative experience.
And
just make sure it's supportive.
We've had a comment earlier from Andrew around employers having more focus on equity rather than equality and seeing it as a positive thing. Yeah, so it's really interesting, isn't it, to try and challenge these mindsets moving forward.
Absolutely, especially as advisors, you know, we can ask those questions. I will very often ring up anonymously and I will say, I'm supporting an individual who has applied for a job with yourselves. He's got some barriers. Can I just ask you what your process is, or can I have a bit of a conversation? And I can gauge then from how open the employer is going to be from that very first conversation. And then I can go further in and say, look, you know, the individual, I'll get them to maybe give you an email, and it just starts those conversations, because for me it's about empowering that individual to support themselves rather than doing that for them and employers making a decision. And it just works really nicely. And these are just an overview of some of the solutions, but I would just say be creative and be open to have conversations, and that then it'll end more positively. So just an overview of some really good practice examples that I've seen. So it was a very big clothing store that I worked with, and I contacted them, and they supported an individual to actually complete an application form verbally. That was really positive because it meant I didn't have to do it, and the person themselves did it verbally with the employer. So the employer was able to see what that person was able to do and could hear that actually verbally the individual was brilliant, but on an application form they might struggle to know what to write where. So that was really positive. There have been situations where people have set tasks to evidence ability rather than just ask questions. So there's been tasks involved. Companies have provided questions before the interview, so that some of them have been a couple of days before, some of them 10 minutes before, but that's always had very positive results. Just a bit of a point here is make sure that you're clear about what you want when you're asking the questions. So one of the situations that we had that isn't really a good practice example, but it's an example, is that they asked somebody to do a task, but they weren't looking at the task. They were looking at the teamwork. They were looking at the conversation and the communication. If you're going to support somebody who's neurodiverse in that situation, tell them that you're looking at their communication skills, because they can become quite focused in the task and actually not do the thing that you're looking for. And remember that no applicants are psychic. We don't know what you're looking for. So it's helpful to know we're going to do a group task. We're going to be looking at you doing the task, but also about your teamwork. And then at least then that person has got a fair chance to go, okay, I need to work with others quite well in this situation. Make sure that you ask in more details. If somebody answers very brief, that might be that they don't know the answer. It might be that they've not understood the question, or it might be that your question hasn't clearly shown that you want a lot of detail. So if you ask a question that says, can you give me an example of a time when you did good customer service, the response might be, well, I used to work at Tesco. You obviously want more information than that. So there's no harm as an interviewer to say, can you give me a little bit more information about that? What was part of your role? Just to help that person to kind of give more detail. And then give guidance prior to interview to reduce anxiety. So, you know, what to expect. Ask them, ask employers what they're going to be given as the interview process. You know, if you're expecting it to be half-an-hour interviews, let the person know. Otherwise, they might go, oh, that interview was a bit short. Maybe I've not answered the questions right. Whereas if you lay out in advance what the expectations are, hopefully that person will be more comfortable and will perform better at interview. Has anybody got any questions at this point before we move on to the in-work support?
We've had lots of chatting on the chat and sort of chatting about what you're talking about, but no direct questions yet, but they will come, I have no doubt.
That's fine. I'll make sure to leave time for questions at the end. So reasonable adjustments, there's a lot of information on this slide, but basically reasonable adjustments are supported by the Equality Act. So employers have to make reasonable adjustments to enable a disabled person to work. Now, reasonable adjustments, reasonable is the important part here. Now, I am an advocate to support disabled individuals into work, but I also need to make sure that employers know what is reasonable. So it's a bit of a relationship. It needs to be based on the individual, as I said earlier. Not all adjustments will be appropriate. And don't assume that you know what the individual needs. So as I said earlier about the conditions, don't go, oh, you're dyslexic, we'll get you some coloured paper. Because that might not necessarily be what the barrier is. So don't assume that you know what somebody might need. Talk to that individual and ask them what will help them. being proactive is always better than being reactive. So after this session, it would be really good for you to kind of look at your own recruitment processes and go, how accessible are they? Do we offer reasonable adjustments? And think about how that will benefit the individual, but also benefit the organisation. These conversations will really help. And adjustments are not always big. So they're not always, you know, thousands of pounds worth of adjustments. Sometimes it's the smallest changes that have the biggest impact. So I've got a lady at the moment that's doing an apprenticeship, and the college sent out all of the paperwork in white paper. So I photocopy it and put it on cream. That is a 5-second job. It is literally, it doesn't take me very long at all, but actually that enables her to write her own answers rather than me having to write them for her. So think about what adjustments might be needed, because it can sometimes be very, very small. It can be, one of the guys I've supported this week, he's recently got a job. He, in the interview, he met the interview panel the day before the interview. So they did a video call the day before, they introduced themselves, so that when he went into the interview, he already had met the individuals that were in the panel. That is something that takes 5 minutes, but can be the difference between somebody who is disabled but getting a job or not getting a job. So ask the questions. The worst that can happen is that the employer says no. So moving into common workplace barriers. So the person you've supported now has got the job, fabulous. Now, where do we go from there? So I'm just going to highlight some of these on here. So sometimes people within the workplace could struggle with things like ambiguous rules, so things not being followed. So it might be that, for example, you do flexible working. Now, flexible working is fabulous, but for somebody who's neurodiverse, that can be challenging when somebody says, as long as you get your work done, I don't mind when you take your lunch break. So thinking about specific customers that I have, they have to take the lunch between 12 and 1. It's what they've always done. That's how it is. And 9 times out of 10, that's what needs to happen. And managers come in and say, well, I don't mind when you take your lunch. Actually, that creates more barriers than it solves. So that can be a real barrier for some of our customers, is around kind of ambiguous rules or people maybe not following all of those rules. Team training and team meetings can be quite difficult. Again, online, there's a lot more barriers, well, there's different barriers online to what there would be face-to-face, but there are still things there. So just be mindful of that. Some people struggle to know what to do during unstructured time. So a lot of people have got background jobs that you could do when you've finished all of your tasks, for example. So I do training. If I ever get 5 minutes free, I'll write some more training, so I've got it there ready for when I need it. Somebody who's neurodiverse might just need a bit of guidance around that to know what to do when there isn't anything set in place to do. People might need longer to learn new tasks. So it might be that the induction is a little bit longer, but once they've learned the task, they might absolutely fly with it and not need any support. So they might need a little bit more support initially to help to learn the new tasks. They might have difficulty engaging with social events or unwritten social rules like the tea rota. You know, things like who makes the drinks is very, very difficult, especially if somebody with autism, and again, thinking of a specific customer, he doesn't drink hot drinks. So when the tea rota came in, he'd never, ever made a cup of coffee before. And I know up in Yorkshire, we're not all in Yorkshire, but up in Yorkshire, the tea rota is quite important in some offices. So yeah, thank you, Thomas. I've just seen the thumbs up. The tea rota is really important, but for somebody with autism, you might need to show them how to make the drinks first before they can get involved in that tea rota. And that's exactly what I did with one of my customers, is I taught him how to make a cup of tea, which seems really silly, but then he could then engage with the rest of the staff. Whereas he was actually quite isolated because they just said, oh, well, he can't do it, he can't make tea. And in actual fact, it took me an hour to teach him to make a good brew. So it's about how you involve people. The same with social events. Another lady that I've been supporting never gets asked to the Christmas party because she always says no. But it's the invite that's important. It's not the event that's important. So make sure that people are still involving them in social events, even if the answer is no. It's nice to be included. And it reduces that feeling of isolation. Some individuals can struggle to communicate effectively with managers and colleagues. I know personally, since we've started working from home, most of the communication is via email. I really struggle with that because sometimes I find it very hard to read the tone of an email. So it might be that if you're working with somebody that struggles with that, is telling the manager, actually, if you're going to send an email, can you follow it up with a telephone call? Or can you make sure you have a Teams chat about the content? Just so that person can understand what the tone is of the email. As I said earlier, some individuals have got quite high expectations, they're quite perfectionists, so people can be quite hard on themselves. So again, if you're working with somebody in the workplace, it's about how you manage those high expectations. Some people can really struggle with feeling overloaded, especially if they're working in a bit of a team working situation. There might also be environmental barriers. So obviously with COVID, environments have changed, so offices are different. Now, on one hand, working from home for a lot of our neurodiverse customers has been fabulous because they can control their heating, they can control where they sit, they can control their environment. But at some point, they might return back to the workplace, and it's how you manage the different rooms. For example, our office holds about 20 people. When there's just me in it, it's very echoey. So it changes the environment just by there being less people around. So it's being aware of that. A lot of companies are now deciding to downscale and have hot desking. That can be a difficulty for somebody with autism specifically because of those changes to routines. Hot desking doesn't only mean a change to where you might sit or where you might be in an office. It also means that you have to be aware of kind of that when you walk in, you might be in a different place to where you're expecting. So hot desking can cause some barriers. And people might not have an understanding of conditions. So colleagues might not understand what people's barriers are and misread them as being difficult or being awkward. So it's how we raise awareness with colleagues. And again, as advisors, if you're supporting somebody in work, it's your role to kind of bridge that gap, to have those conversations, to make sure that people understand. So some support strategies for in work is things like speaking to the individual. So open conversation is really beneficial. Discuss that person's concerns and what they feel they might struggle with. You know, the best person to involve is the individual. They will have the best knowledge of what their barriers might be. And then you start, like, that's the starting point. Make sure that communication is clear and correct. So if you have verbal meetings or if you have verbal conversations with somebody, follow it up with an email just to make sure that that person understands the expectations, but also has something to revisit, something to go back to reflect, especially if you're an advisor that you only see somebody once a week. Send a follow-up email so that person can just go back to it and say, right, what did we talk about? Give people time to think and process information. So give information maybe 1 week and then revisit it. As an employer, if you've got an important meeting that you need a response to, it might be that you give somebody the information prior to the meeting and say, we're having a team meeting on Thursday, we're going to be talking about this. Can you ever think about it before Thursday? And it just stops putting people on the spot. With COVID at the moment, I think that every lockdown has changed communication, but I know during the first lockdown, my phone was like a hotline. I was getting tons of phone calls, I was getting surprise Teams calls, and that appears to have settled down now. But what we tend to do, if somebody's struggling, we tend to up the support. But for actually somebody who's neurodiverse, that might be overloading. So try and have planned communication. So it might be that you do a daily check-in, it might be that you check in every Friday. Try not to do a lot of ad hoc, just checking you're okay, because although that's supportive, it can be overloading and it can lead to more barriers. So just be careful with the contacts that you have and try and plan it where possible. In emails, make sure that you are clear if you want a response. So if you're asking a question, even verbally, in fact, make sure that you're asking for a response. Don't just kind of say, put a statement out there because you might not get a response. Try and reduce any avoidable last minute changes where possible. So try and avoid that. And if somebody's returning to the workplace following COVID, for example, consider a return to work meeting just so that person can kind of phase back into the workplace, especially if they've been home for the whole of this kind of transition through COVID. And then consider temporary adaptations to the role. And I think, again, this is something that we would maybe not have considered before, but now employers are starting to be more flexible about home working and things because we've had to do it. So just because they've never done it like this before, now, especially as advisors, we've got a real opportunity to say, well, have they been working at home during lockdown and how did that fare? Would it be possible to have a hybrid role coming back so that somebody has got that time to work from home? And that helps somebody to, you know, that shows real adaptable support in the workplace. And then consider having a workplace assessment. So to identify these potential reasonable adjustments. So it might be something, like I said earlier, flexible working or different coloured paper, there might be something really simple that can be done, but you need to have a conversation about it to start to highlight those things. So just to check you're all still awake, question time. So only 10% of autistic adults receive employment support, but what percentage say that they would like it? It's a little bit outdated, this. It's from 2012, I think. But it's more to see what support people might need. So we've got 23%, we've got a few for that, a few for 35, 53% is definitely in charge, definitely winning.
Some people are giving it some thought.
Yeah, we're thinking about it. We're thinking about
they
it.
are. Yes, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
I've just seen in the chat, Andrew has said that he sets up a daily 9 a.m. meeting so the team can meet informally, as if they're in the office, and they do this online, and it's a good opportunity to say hello and chat and stay in touch. And it's optional, and work talk is discouraged. May not be suitable for all neurodiverse people. I think again, it's how it's said. You've given the option so people can come if they want to. You've put the structure in place because you've said no work talk, preferably. So I think that's a really good situation for somebody who is neurodiverse, because there's that option there and they can choose to kind of jump in. But it might be that the first time it's there, they might need a buddy to go in with, for example, just to support them with that. But no, that's a really good thing. The 9 a.m. meetings, I love them. Bit of a cup of tea in the morning. So looking at the poll, so 53% has definitely been in the lead for that one. And absolutely, 53% say they want it. So yeah, 2012 research project that was from. So that just shows that there are individuals out there that want that support, and it's how we get that to them. So now looking at how we can help. So this is the final part of the webinar. So we're looking at some of the questions that our customers have. So is it expensive to get support? What support is out there? Who pays for this support? Can an employer refuse the support, or will the employer think I cannot do my job? And the employer can actually say, we don't want this support. However, generally, I get a very positive response from employers once we explain what the support is and how we're doing it. And even to the point where I've mentioned cybersecurity before. Previously, cybersecurity wouldn't have let us in because of confidentiality. They're working with very high profile clients in a very sensitive area. But once it was explained that actually we're not there for the job, we're there for the individual to help them with their prioritizing or managing their workload, employers are generally on board. And hopefully a good employer will not think that somebody can't do the job, but just see the potential in that person to be even better at their job. So looking at this support that's out there, so I'm hoping a lot of you will be aware of Access to Work, and that is where people can get funding to get support. So disabled people can get funding to stay in work or to start work. And it provides that practical and financial support for people who have a disability. And it helps with not only support, it can help with equipment as well. So a guy that I'm supporting at the moment has just got Grammarly for the next year, and that's going to really help him because he writes reports all the time. So there's a lot of things on offer. And that's through Access to Work. And I have got a guidance. If anybody wants it, just drop me an email. I'll put my email at the end. We can send out like the support that we do. So we have got a booklet that explains that. So our support, the way it works is it's very person-centered. It's very flexible. We'll support individuals in the workplace. It might be that somebody needs an hour a week, or it might be somebody needs 5-6 hours a week. And it's based on a needs assessment that we do when we meet the customer to find out what they need. And generally, this is mentoring support. So it's helping them with any of their barriers, liaising with the employer and helping them through. We can also offer funded training for the employer. So we can offer disability awareness training for the employer. And that really helps because it's based around the needs of the individual. And that can start communication in the workplace. And this can be provided face-to-face or through remote support. So during lockdown, we had to change our approach and we started to deliver online support. And so far, it's been really, really good. We've got customers now across the whole of the UK. So we are able to offer that as well. And it's all based around removing these barriers or reducing these barriers and giving guidance to employers. One of the other things that we're doing at the moment is apprenticeship support. So we have qualified teachers who provide apprenticeship support. And what they do is they work as a bit of a teaching assistant to bridge the gap for employers and for colleges. So we work in the middle to help people to sustain their apprenticeships and to manage their workload, but to also improve their employment skills as well. So we work as a bit of a kind of mentor in the workplace, but also to help manage the apprenticeship caseload. We can also offer workplace assessments. There is a cost to this, but employers will fund that if they feel that the reasonable adjustments that will be given are helpful. So we can offer workplace assessments, and we do deliver extensive reports on what support individuals might need and what reasonable adjustments there might be. And again, they're not always costly. Sometimes it might be moving a desk from one room to another. So they're quite useful for employers, especially if they feel like they've tried a lot of avenues. So as a summary, be adaptable, have clear communication, involve the individual at every step of the way, give individuals time to make decisions and process information, utilize support available and raise awareness within organisations, but most importantly, be supportive and understanding. We could all get a long way with a bit of support and a bit of understanding. And I think I would like that if I was having an interview for a job or I needed support in my workplace. So this is just a little bit about us. So some of the programs that we're involved in, I'm not going to go into great detail around them, but it was just to give you a bit of an idea about the different things that we do at Autism Plus. But you can look at our website and see some of the things that we do. But we are involved in the work and health program. We're involved in lots of different things. We are, My Baby is a supported education pathway, which is helping adults that maybe don't find college very easy but are not quite sure what they want to do. So that's kind of where we come in to adapt education programs to help individuals to get qualifications to get into work. And we've also got social and wellbeing groups as well. And here are my contact details and my manager's contact details, but does anybody have any questions?
I'm just waiting for them to come in at the moment for you, Dawn. That's right. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Everybody on the call, as you are IEP members, what you will know is there is a page on our IEP website which has all of our corporate partners on, and you can click on if you click on the Autism Plus link, it will take you directly to the website as well, to their website, so you'll be able to get that support. So I've just seen a question, or is it a comment that's come in? Gillian said, as an employment advisor, is your service available to us to refer our clients into for additional pre-employment support and for additional support whilst in work?
So the pre-employment is, there is a charge to the pre-employment. We haven't got funding for pre-employment support. We do work with lots of different organisations where people will pay us to do that additional support. So on the work and health programme, we are suppliers for that. So we would do intensive specialist support for individuals to kind of help with that accelerated progress. So for the pre-employment support, there is a charge to that, but we are available to refer. And just so you know as well, people don't need to have diagnosis. So we work on barriers, not diagnosis. So that's really helpful to know. With regards for the additional support whilst in work, we can absolutely do that. So we would look to apply to Access to Work for funding, and we would be able to do a needs assessment, and we would put support in place for that individual to help them to sustain employment. So if you've got somebody that maybe got autism or any other kind of neurodiverse conditions that's just got through an interview process and you think, fab, this person needs support, we absolutely can do that. And we welcome it, to be honest. It'd be really, really good.
Excellent, fantastic. Charlotte says, thank you, Dawn. That was very helpful. Lots of thank you, Dawns. That was very helpful coming through to us now. It has been a fantastic session. So we've got 4 minutes left. I'm being really good at keeping us to our timings because it's the big thing now, isn't it? So we don't all get Zoom fatigue. So I do have to finish this at 1 o'clock. But if anyone has any final questions you'd like to ask, it's been a very busy chat facility. Oh, some lovely comments. Dawn, you are great. She is, isn't she, James? Thank you very much. Keep saying nice things to her, everyone, because I do want to tempt her back for another webinar in the future. So yeah, loads and loads of people. Sam saying it's been very informative. Thank you, that was great. Eni saying thank you very much. Alicia saying it was brilliant. Thank you to all, including the organisers. Thank you, Russ. Always nice to get a thank you as well. It has been a fantastic session. Thank you all for coming. I won't, if anyone comes in with a last second question, I will ask it. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say again, thank you so much, Dawn. It was a really interesting, engaging session. We are going to share this later on via our IEP YouTube channel. So although we don't send slides out, you will be able to access all of that information. Everyone on this session obviously has registered, so you will receive an email with a link as soon as the recording is made available. Before I finish off, I did see another question come in from Jenny. So if we are struggling with an employer, would you be able to support us with any advice? She says, Dawn.
Absolutely. I mean, as long as I don't get hundreds of people contacting me, we do this because we want to make a difference for the people that we support. So even if we've got somebody that isn't able to fund themselves or can't come through to us because of money, we would always say, please, please, please contact us, because we might be able to signpost you. We do have little contracts all over, so it might be if you contact us, we might have a little pot of money there anyway. So absolutely, if you need any guidance, please send me an email. I'm really happy to help.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So that's going to bring us pretty much to the end of our time. So once again, thank you, Dawn. It's been brilliant. Thank you, all of you who's attended. I'm sorry I didn't get to say hello to everyone and pick out all of the comments, but it's just been too busy, which is a wonderful place for us to be. We are going to have more sessions coming up over the coming week. So please, if you've not subscribed to the IEP YouTube channel, hop on over there and subscribe, because all of the recordings are always shared and everything's on there. All IEP members, we announce these webinars via our Learning Network e-bulletin, which comes out on a Wednesday morning every week, and it has what's coming up over the coming weeks. And it also has interesting stuff in there around things that we can do in lockdown to continue our own CPD. And I also make sure there's something in there for the kids as well. For those of you who, like me, are a parent and homeschooling and trying to keep children occupied, I always make sure there's something in there in a kids corner as well. If you don't receive that and you'd like to, if you've joined us today through another media, my email address is helen.lee, which is LEE, at iemployability.org, and just drop me an email. Or you can go to our website and use a contact form and it will come to me and I will get you added to the list. We have a wonderful programme coming up over the coming weeks. Next week, we have Andy from MZ joining us, and he's going to be taking us through the regional labour market LMI, or labour market information reports that have been produced. So really interesting session, but we have lots coming up for you over the coming weeks. So please do refer to that and keep joining us for future sessions. So thank you very much to everyone who spent their lunch with us today, or their lunchtime with us today. I know your time is valuable. Thank you, Dawn, again, for what's been a really engaging and interesting session. And I will say goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you all on a future session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.